Okay, we'll be starting in just a few minutes. If you want to take your seats. I'll go up and make an announcement and then introduce you. You're going to explain the format.
Oh, do you have a thing that has the format?
Oh,
I think I remember. I can pull up my story.
Okay, hello. Good evening, everyone. I'm Richard Cray, and on behalf of Sierra Forward, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's town hall. Now, Sierra Forward is a volunteer organization that works to foster understanding through dialogue among those with open minds, and that's why we've invited you here tonight. Now, the town hall is a venerated American tradition. It provides an opportunity for the average citizen to engage with those who hold or seek public office. And the candidates you'll hear from tonight are here to respond to your questions. So please put on your thinking caps, compose some cogent questions. Please keep them succinct and to the point. And you'll see a gentleman with a wireless mic around the room, and just raise your hand or stand up when the candidates call for questions. And we send invitations to all the major party candidates for California Assembly and U.S. Congress. Congressman Doug LaMalfa replied to our invitation by simply writing that he would be unable to attend. His opponent, Max Steiner, accepted. Incumbent California Assemblyman James Gallagher responded that he had a scheduling conflict and would not be here. His opponent, David Leon Zink, is here, and he'll lead off tonight. But first, I want to introduce the moderator for the town hall, someone most of you will recognize, Mr. Robert Sumuth, the editor of the Appeal Democrat newspaper.
David Leon Zink will be first. Whoa. If you didn't know, each candidate will get about 5 to 10 minutes to speak and say what they need to say. And then after that, we'll have time for questions. It looks like everyone could probably ask their question if they have them. We have enough people here. So, yeah, David?
So I set my timer so I don't go over here. Yes. Well, hi, everybody. Yes, my name is David Leon Zink, candidate for California State Assembly District 3, and I would love to earn your vote. That's what I say as I campaign out and about in the district. I'm a fourth generation from the North State here. My people settled in 1860 in the shadow of Bald Rock in Butte County, and I was raised in Oroville. My mom and my dad demonstrated for me the values of the dignity of work, self-respect, and respect for others. And they raised me in the church, which also taught those ideals, but gave me a way to think about it. In each person, there is the imprint of the divine. And that imprint is worthy of our respect, no matter who you are. Now, as I began to prepare for the campaign, I went back to our source document for our social contract, the Constitution. And I found those values right there in the first three words. You remember what they are? We the people. We built a country on we the people. At the time we spoke it, it was a radical idea. Nations around the world scoffed at us. What do you mean? You're going to build a country on your average Joe and Jane? And our answer was yes, that's right. We've got enough trust in each other, enough respect in each other to believe that we can order our affairs better than any imposter, any pretender, any authoritarian. We the people, we the people. And that is the cornerstone of our social contract. We believe in it so much that the first institution named in our document is not the executive branch, it's the people's house, the House of Representatives. We the people. Now, if you withdraw the respect and the trust out of that cornerstone, the building that it's founded on, that it's supporting, begins to crumble. And that's what we've been seeing here in recent history. We've been withdrawing our respect and our trust from each other in this hyper-partisan environment that we're in. I talk to people all the time out on the campaign trail. One of the first things they'll tell me that they're worried about in our country is the dissension, the hyper-partisanship that we see everywhere. They're worried that we're not going to be able to survive. The kind of campaign I want to run is the kind that puts that we the people trust and respect back into the dialogue. We can model it, we can lead with it. One of the first places I'd like to start is respecting women's rights to choose. You know, we cannot withdraw respect from a woman's ability to govern her own body, to make the choice if and when she's going to have a child. We can't do that and have a whole country. If we do that, the country we know will begin to crumble. Let's keep a woman's right to choose sacred in California. If elected, I will safeguard all of our legislation that protects a woman's right to choose. I'm there to guard it, and I'm there to build on it. Another thing that flows from we the people is the need for single-payer health care in the state. You know, many of us feel that health care is a human right. Why can't we offer it? We cannot have a nation that is the haves and have-nots of decent health care. And yet, so many of our neighbors and friends are worried, paycheck to paycheck, if they get a health incident, they could be deep in the hole soon, and who knows, maybe lose a house, maybe find themselves on the streets. We've got to do better. We need to assure that all Californians are provided with decent and affordable health care, and we can do that with a single-payer system. We've modeled it out, and the average Californian will be able to save tremendously in a single-payer health care model. If you go online and look at a Medicare for All savings calculator and do the exercise yourself, you'll find out what you can save in your household over time if we move to a single-payer system. I'm a single-payer advocate, and I'm glad to have the endorsement of Health Care for All California and North State Medicare for All. They've endorsed me as a candidate. Climate change has been on my mind. My wife and I moved back to Magalia in 2007. In 2018, we and our neighbors and 9 out of 10 of the folks in our community lost our homes in the Camp Fire. 2 years later, another fire, the North Complex Fire, took out 2 of the Zinc homes. One my mom and dad built in 1963, and another one that my grandfather built in 1900. So we understand the loss. We've been journeying with our community in the rebuilding of Paradise ever since then, and now I sit on 5 boards that are all about bringing our community back together, planning for a great new future together. We're working on affordable housing together. We're working on rebuilding the arts and culture environment together. There's a lot of work that we need to do. It's important that California do its fair share on the planet to reduce greenhouse emissions. And that's why I'm in favor of Prop 30. Prop 30 provides a mechanism for funding some important changes that we can make to our infrastructure. 35% goes to building out the electric charging infrastructure. 45% goes to helping low and middle income families make the transition into an affordable electric vehicle. And 20% goes to a very important agency here in the state of California, CAL FIRE. It helps them hire more employees, helps them train and retain them for longer. It buys equipment to help address the needs in the wildland-urban interface. And it sets them loose, not just on fighting fires more effectively and efficiently, but also on helping to prevent forest fires from happening. And so I think it's a good move. And along with that, there's money to help low and middle income families fire harden their homes and create safe spaces around. There are lots of folks that are aging in the wildland WUI interface, and I think we need to give them a help. I'm glad to say California has among the most robust firearms laws in the country. And because of that, we have among the lowest deaths by gun violence in the United States. Care to guess who has the lowest overall in the United States? The state with the lowest gun violence is Hawaii. They've got good gun regulations, and they have no neighbors. We've got a few bad neighbors in California, and so that keeps our deaths by gun violence a little bit high. I think we need to keep doing the good work and play with our neighbors so that they can start playing our direction instead of us suffering because of the direction they're going. When elected, I will continue to support the legislation that we have on the books for guns. And I want to look at the regulatory system so that I can tease out where there's some nonsense going on. You know, Democrats can get carried away every once in a while on a regulation. I want to make sure that our regulations around guns make sense. I am glad to say that Moms Demand Action has recognized my campaign and provided the distinction of being a gun sense candidate. And last, I'm a listener. My instincts are to lean in with curiosity, respect, and to listen. And as I've traveled around the district from the north outskirts of Lincoln all the way on up to just beyond Red Bluff, that's District 3, I've heard from a lot of folks what the needs and concerns are. I've called most of the elected officials now in the district, had conversations with many of them. I talked with, is it Nick Michelli, County Board of Supervisors here in Sutter County just yesterday. Had breakfast with Todd Kimmelshoe up there in Butte County and around the district. And I'm glad to say that many of those folks have offered, not Nick and not Todd, but many other elected officials have offered their endorsement of my campaign. It includes 4 former mayors here in the district and some sitting council members and 1 board of supervisors. So what they're saying is David's heading the right direction. He's hearing our needs. He's the kind of model we need in our district right now. Please vote for David Leon Zink. And I'm just quoting them, folks. You can vote for me if you want, but go to the website, zinkforassembly.com. You can see where I stand on other issues. You can read the endorsements for yourselves. And oh, by the way, if you happen to see the donate button, please feel free to click and give. Thanks.
All right, thank you, David. And we have questions. I know I have some.
Yeah. Oh. Hey, Bruce, could you grab my water for me?
Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay.
Hi.
Hi. So the Sutter County has Measure A, which is the sales tax initiative. This community may or may not support that initiative. And one of the things that you might be able to tell here, Sutter County Fire is really struggling desperately. So is there, in case that initiative...
That's the popcorn maker.
Yeah, in case that initiative does not get passed, is there any way that you, it's like help us? Do you think that the state would be able to somehow come up with, or is there something that you can think of that maybe might be able to help us out of that situation? We are the only county, except for San Francisco, that has no assistance from the state because we have no state lands here. That's one of the things that was always that kind of key thing. So
Yeah.
we can't have any help from Cal Fire.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. You know, I think the design of the local governments is that we should pay for our own infrastructure, right? I mean, in theory, that's what we should be able to do. So that means we should have taxes that that we pay that can hire enough police officers, enough firefighters to do the job for us. The sad reality is there are many communities stretched around California that have the opposite that's true. They've got a tax base that's stressed. There are lots of reasons why they're not able to generate the revenues that they need to do the job for the populace. And so I think there's a need for the state to step in and provide some funding in that category. And that's something I've got some background in listening to folks around the country because of my professional experience. And what I see in state after state, community after community is we have these gaps of funding. And we've got to do what we can to help local communities in the gap until they can stand up on their own and provide the funding they need to continue forward. So there's a there. I would want to work with the Sutter County officials in going after pockets of funding, finding out what the needs are first, finding out what we can do to make sure it's not going to be a permanent situation, and then figure out how we can go after funding that's going to help them to retain, to hire and retain the personnel they need to do the job.
Any other?
No one else, huh? All right. Well, I got a bunch of questions. Your opponent, he loves to tweet. I got to tell you, and he has done some good things for the district. He has sponsored bills and written bills to help wildfire victims. But how do you think you can help your district in a way that hasn't been done previously?
So, right after the campfire, I'm president of Paradise Community Guilds, and the first response after the day of the fire, in fact, was to try to meet down in Chico to count heads, and then we established a pattern of meeting every twice a week there for a few months just to help each other through the process. And during that time, we put our minds on the project of rebuilding our community. And one of the things we did is we took a field trip down to Santa Rosa to the Rebuild Green Expo that was happening in 2019. Is at the Santa Rosa Fairgrounds. And there I became aware of technologies and building materials out there that I'd never heard of before, many of which had very low propensity to burst into flames if presented with a blowtorch, and could reach some affordable use if they could only scale up. And what I became immediately aware of is we've got lots of building technologies available to us right now. The market, the free market, has not, it's going at a slower pace than what we need. The Zinc family is now rebuilding in Berry Creek with autoclaved aerated concrete block. That's a block that weighs a quarter as much as a regular concrete block. You can cut into it. You can hit it with a blowtorch, won't burn. It's going to withstand the fire next time. It's a 300, 400-year house that we're building right now. Most stick-built homes right now are going to have a very short life. And of course, we have the manufactured homes that were among the first to burn in the campfire. I don't think there was a single manufactured home that made it through the campfire. And then modular homes that are coming after that. They're made with materials that are really not going to do well in the fire next time. And so the issue right now is affordability of materials that won't burn the next time. And we're leaving out a whole class of folks who've not yet been made whole post-campfire financially. They can't afford to build the house they need in order to continue to live in the wildland-urban interface with confidence. So I think there's a role for the state of California here. I think we need some innovation programs that are designed to first educate the marketplace in what are the available materials that we've got out there, and to educate the general contractors out there on how to build with these materials. So we need demonstration sites where the public can come and see these things. And we need to engage with the local community colleges, which are a training ground for much of the workforce these days, to become savvy in how to build with these things. And then I think we need to look at how to jigger this thing financially so that we can get folks into a home made out of worthwhile materials that are going to withstand the fire next time. That means looking at the insurance industry and seeing what we can do if there are some defensible savings that we can have on insurance that are built with these sorts of homes. Maybe getting some help. This is also a climate change issue. Building with the right kinds of materials gives you the opportunity to keep your carbon footprint a little bit lower, not just in the building process, but also over time. There's just so much more. So I think what we need to do is create a program that helps folks who are needing to rebuild in the burn scars, a way to rebuild in a way that's going to be responsible for our future. We're working on a project that has that characteristic right now in Paradise. I'm also chair of Regenerating Paradise, and one of the things we're doing is collaborating with UC Davis, working toward building out an affordable housing complex on 47 acres down Clark Road, just below Bushman, if you know Paradise. And we're wanting to do it with innovative materials that will provide the university something to learn from over time. And it's something that the California Energy Commission is already engaged in right now in terms of, not with us yet, although we did provide a proposal that passed muster in the first phase, but yeah, they're looking for opportunities to build these kinds of projects right now. The funding is there, so I think it's just a matter of putting the pieces together so that we can make a difference for folks there in the wildland-urban interface. Did I answer your question, Robert?
Some of it, yeah, sure. You answered the Paradise question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So someone asked from the audience where you're from, but I think you said where you were from in the beginning, right? You're from Butte County.
Yeah. Raised in Oroville, my people ranched for 3 generations in the shadow of Bald Rock and Berry Creek from 1860 until the year of my birth, and then raised in Oroville. After I graduated from college, my wife and I moved down to Southern California. We lived in the Pasadena area for 23 years and moved back up in 2007, and we've been here ever since.
Okay. Question, yes, good.
Yeah. No, yes.
You may want to use this one. Richard.
Okay. Yeah. I wonder what plan did you have to help our community in regards to increase our earning capacity? And you touch a little bit, in your comment about working with community colleges. The majority of us know that when we're young, our parents take care of us. And then when we get to a certain age, then we put money to take care of ourselves. Unfortunately, I think the only place that allow us to do that, either get a certificate, a degree, training, is the junior colleges. So what, if any, plans or ideas do you have to increase the funding for local community colleges?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So I think of everything through the lens of what's happening on the ground right now and how can we bring different strains together so that we have multiples of value when we tackle something. So it's always good if we can get a win for this and that and perhaps another thing and perhaps another thing, right? On the community college question, the Biden administration has been a champion of building out education from the early part to post-high school part, right? They're championing early childhood education, and now they're wanting to pay for a couple of years of education post-high school. Now, I love education. I'm all about that. But our Republican friends are going to say, well, how are we going to pay for that? And why should we offer it for free? Stay with me for a moment. So, forest experts tell us our 33 million acres of forest needs to burn every 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, depending on local hydrology and elevation, variety of other factors. Varies from place to place, but having prescribed burn programs is an important part of our forest management now. Also logging, there's a place for logging here. These things need to work together, but we need to get a prescribed burn program going. The most acreage we burned in a given year is 500,000 acres in prescribed burns. That's not sufficient. We need to build out the workforce that's going to do that work. But where do we find them? Well, how about folks that are post-high school? Why don't we go there first? What about offering a civilian program for folks that are post-high school and bring them out into the forest on the model of the California Conservation Corps? You remember what the California Conservation Corps promises? What is it? It's hard work, low pay, and miserable living conditions, right? So what about using that kind of a model? Bringing these post-high school folks out into the wilderness, and by the way, if you've talked to folks that have gone through that program, it's a lifetime experience, very much like the military. It's a kind of social glue. You know, where were you when you did your service? Well, I was up in the Redwoods, up in Crescent City. Oh yeah, well I was down in Camarillo. Oh yeah, did you meet so-and-so? I mean, people know each other. There's an instant sort of communication that goes on. We can provide a year or two of that service to them. Pay them at the minimum wage, you know, perhaps a little bit more, but in the meantime, provide them with health care, of course. But in the meantime, they're earning credit that will get them through the rest of their college education. How do we pay for that? Well, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's much less expensive to prevent a forest fire than it is to fight one, to suppress one. And I think we've got some savings in there that we can tap to help pay for that kind of a program. And I would mention some side ideas that come along with that. Perhaps we can make this as a track towards citizenship for folks that are undocumented here in the state. Perhaps we can make this as an opportunity for folks who've just completed a prison sentence to begin to get restreamed into society, to give them some opportunity to gain some skills that can be marketable in the future, and perhaps that would reduce recidivism. So ideas that can go together like that. That's an example of the kind of solution I'd be looking for in helping to pay for community college education. And in terms of the wages from there, you know, people get to make their own choices about what sort of career tracks they want to pursue. And there are naturally some jobs that are going to draw more for some folks than others. But I think that's what you mentioned is a good reason for us to make sure that we have a safeguard, a minimum wage, that is there to protect your average worker at all times. Enough for them to afford a place to live in, to buy groceries, to do the things that are the basic necessities of an American life. Did I answer your question? Thank you.
All right, we got another question from someone online. I'll try to make it an actual question. So the statistics don't necessarily always match the rhetoric, but crime is a big issue right now among a big segment of the population, or at least a loud section. Is there anything that you see that can be done? Are there any laws that need to be changed or fixed in regards to how California has handled simple crimes, crime in general, or sentencing?
I've always thought of crime as the kind of problem that you don't take on head on, but rather the kind of problem that you take on sideways. When people are having their needs met, there's less of a need to explore a life of crime, to walk into the market and steal that loaf of bread, or to take, or the variety of things that are out there. I mean, there are some crimes that happen just in the course of being reckless in daily life, right? You can never take that bit of wildness out of a person's character. There's always going to be somebody who's going to want to speed, and speed all the time. They're willing to pay the tickets, What are you going to do with a guy like that? But there are crimes that are more serious, and the more serious crimes often come from situations where folks are feeling a great deal of distress, there's some despair. Often there's an economic component to it. Honestly, I think one of the best ways that we can prevent crime is by making sure that our economy is functioning for everybody. And that's where we need to go to work. And so I think there's a role, particularly right now in this period of time where we're dealing with climate change and need to adapt quickly to some of the demands that are being placed on us so that we can do our best job of contributing to slowing climate change and making sure that California survives some of the big things that are coming along. I think there's a role for government to play in stimulating sectors where we can develop jobs for people. And I think, wonderfully, climate change is pregnant with opportunities for jobs. I just discussed one. There are so many more in the building sector and elsewhere. So I think we need to lean into making sure that folks have an opportunity to get a leg up. That'll reduce the frustration that's out there and the necessity some people feel to engage in a life of crime. There are some things, like with drug distribution, et cetera, that are really just the kinds of things that we need to be able to continue to do what we've done. Those are things you take head on. But again, provide more jobs. Maybe you can reduce the demand for drugs that help people escape their daily lives. So that's how I think about that category.
All right, this is my question. So the area or district in which you are running is mostly conservative. It's probably closer than most people think, but it is mostly conservative. How would you break through what has become a wall that is just very hard to break through, where people just will vote R no matter what the issues are, they'll vote R? How do you get through to that person?
I love that question. Thank you.
Oh.
I've come to describe campaigning, half of campaigning, as chasing Republicans down the sidewalk. And so here's how the campaigning has gone. I present my palm card out there at the farmer's market or at the county fair, and I say, hey, I'm David Leon Zink. I'm running for California State Assembly District 3, and I'd love to earn your vote. Most often what I get is a challenge. Are you Democrat or Republican? I lead off with, well, I'm an independent-minded Democrat, and I don't get any further than that. I get cut off, and the person often says, you Democrats, you're a bunch of baby killers. You're what's ruining this country. You're driving us into the ground. I want nothing to do with you. And that's not when they're, blaming me for, everything that's wrong with the planet, or cussing at me, or actually openly taunting me like a child. So, you know, they turn around, walk away, and then I'm chasing them down the sidewalk. It's when the campaign begins, right? Hey, now, it's we the people, not we the political party, right? You vote for the person, not the party. Why don't you turn around and talk with me? Because when I get elected, I'm going to want to represent you. 4 times out of 5, they stop. We have a conversation. I'm leaning in. I'm listening. I'm not arguing with them, and I'm not trying to change their minds. And I think that's an important step for us. I think this is a time when Democrats can lead by example. A lot of us are fearful that there's a new civil war brewing. It won't be like the North against the South, although we are sorting ourselves into different states at the moment. But it'll be more like Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, you know, in the collapse of the country of Yugoslavia, neighbor on neighbor, a sort of thing. Look, folks, Democrats have an opportunity to show some leadership here. This is what you do. That neighbor that's got their American flag out with the Trump flag next to it, with the FU Biden flag next to it, why don't you go over and introduce yourself and invite them over to your place for a barbecue? Don't talk about politics. Get to know them. Tell them about your kids. Tell them about your dog. Talk about concerns in the neighborhood. It's what we can do to begin to repair the relationships. Because the fiction that's going on in the heads of many of these folks is they eat their children, or some version of that. You know? They think of us as somehow so wrong that the only opportunity, the only way that we're going to get out of the way of America being great again is that we have to be overridden, or maybe some are tempted to think go away. We've got to reaffirm the connections that we have between each other as human beings. Lead with respect, lead with curiosity, ask questions. Put your party affiliation aside, focus on the issues, and see what you can agree on, see how you can build on that to get something done. That's hard work, but you know, it's the kind of work that was done by Gandhi and his followers in India in the 1930s and 40s, right? It was not easy, but folks were willing to put their patriotism, their love of country, their love for their neighbor on the line and keep showing up, bringing what they believe to be true to the conversation, fighting the good fight, but leading with respect and curiosity. I've learned it's never about changing someone's mind. You start by changing their heart. For anybody who's listening, I'm a little geeky on this issue. I love to talk about civil conversation. In fact, after the 2016 election, I founded a guild for civil dialogue with Paradise Community Guilds, and we opened up the doors and invited folks on both sides to talk over the issues. And I discovered the work of Jonathan Haidt. He wrote a book called The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Disagree on Politics and Religion. And the coaching, the essential element there is you got to lead with empathy. It's really the only hope. When we're so vastly divided, you got to start learning to care for folks and learn how to fight the good fight.
Thank you. So the legislature has addressed this recently, but some would say not enough. A common complaint when it comes to housing availability is usually centered around regulations, fees. How will you make it easier for the average Californian to buy a home? And especially first-time buyers.
Yeah, thanks. Well, so California has a lack of affordable housing. It's been plaguing us for quite a long time. The way the rules are rigged here in California, we end up not building enough affordable housing, and it's a crisis. It's one of the reasons why we have so many folks out there that are homeless. The problem with most affordable housing solutions is once somebody gets into something, they're renting. Often there's a renting component. And in the process of that renting, there's no equity being built up. Homeowners get to build up equity. It gives them advantages and opportunities that others don't have. We need to create a situation where folks are able to pay their rent and at the same time have some sort of a pool peeled off that helps them develop some equity. I remember after the economy melted down in, what was it, 2008? I was on a vacation. I met with a gentleman. We were getting to know each other, and it came out that he owned a number of mobile home parks. And he said, you know, a lot of those mobile home parks aren't fully occupied at the moment. And he says, I realize that there are some folks that can't afford now to get into a home. We've just gone through the housing bubble. Things have crashed. And they're desperate to find a place where they can rebuild their lives. Many of them are just broke. And so came on the idea of actually renting the mobile home to them at $300 a month back then, and providing a way for them over time to build up equity. And he had structured it all financially in a way that was working. We can innovate on these models, and you know, over time, folks can find their way into housing that's more affordable. And I would also suggest that there are the climate change component. Build homes that are not likely to burn in the fire next time. Build homes that are going to earn a better insurance rate. You can make that lowered insurance rate a way to lower the cost of getting into a home as well. It's just about making it more affordable, making it more affordable, making it more affordable. So that's a step in that direction, and I'm open to more ideas.
Question? Oh.
Good evening. So one of the things you started off by mentioning is the hyperpartisanship that we see going on right now, and I absolutely agree that's such a huge issue. And one of the things that I think that's resulted in, particularly from elected officials, is very much an oversimplification of issues and the cause of those issues and the solution to those issues. And they're painted in a very black and white circumstance, which often is not the case. And one example of that is the current issue with gas prices in California being so much higher than the rest of the nation. I see the left saying, you know, it's all about corporate profits and that's the problem. And I see the right saying, you know what, it's all about high taxes and regulation in California. And so you have each side really kind of digging their heels in the ground that is the cause. So from where I sit, it seems like we have both of those things. We have evidence of record profits from oil companies, but I think there's also no denying that we have significant regulations and higher taxes than most of the rest of the country, which clearly must play a role in that to some extent. And so my question is, what is the solution? You know, why are we paying higher, you know, more than $2 a gallon more than some other places when, you know, it looks like the regulations, you know, and the taxes don't add up to that much, right? And at the same time, and so what is the cause? What is the solution? How do you help Californians at least be a little bit more comparable and reasonable compared to the rest of the country with respect to gas prices?
Yeah, thank you. I love the question because one of the things it touches on is inequality. You know, California's been blessed. We've got Silicon Valley, we've got natural resources that have created wealth for generations of families. Since, 1980 or so, the portion of tax that the wealthiest among us have been paying has dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped. Simultaneously, the taxes that are paid by the lower and middle classes have raised and raised and raised. So that's where you're feeling the pain. This is something the Republicans don't like to talk about much. They would prefer things, you know, go on the way they are with the supply side trickle-down economics that was supposed to work under Ronald Reagan. It's been given a chance to work plenty. It's never worked. We build from the ground up, right? Not from the top down. That's what we need to do as a society. I really do think that one way to make it easier on your average taxpayer here in the state of California is not through reducing all the regulations, although my ears are wide open on that front. I think regulations should make sense, and I've been pointed to some regulations that don't make sense And I think, we've got to go to work on those things to reduce the burden on your average construction worker, our general contractor, et cetera. But on this issue of life getting more expensive in the state of California, part of the reason is, the taxes are going up on the middle class. I know what I pay in taxes in California. It shocks me every time I pay it. I'd like to pay less, and I'd like to go to work on paying less when you elect me to Sacramento. So dealing with that component, I think, is important. What the Democrats have been saying about the reason for the high gas prices, in my view, is legitimate. Look, we've got corporate profit takers that are out there that are taking huge profits. Gavin Newsom's called out the petroleum industry on this very issue. And now we've got this decision by OPEC here just this week to lower production by, 2 million barrels? I mean, they're trying to restrict supply. The demand's going to remain the same. The prices are going to go up. And Putin is laughing the whole time. Why are we allowing that to occur? It's another reason why we need to transition our people into an electric vehicle or zero emissions vehicle infrastructure, right? But the Republicans want to keep corporate America continuing to make its profits. And I just need to point out, and I think it's fair with the person I'm challenging to say, there's an ideology in place that the fair market, the free market, will cure all ills. We know it doesn't. We see corporate actors misbehaving all the time. So yes, we have high gas prices here in the state of California. Should we repeal our gas tax to make it easier on the average driver here, the folks that are driving long distances? Well, a couple of things there. Those taxes pay for our roads infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure. If we repeal that tax, aren't we going to have a headache down the line on our transportation projects? And just because we repealed a tax, how does that translate to some corporation reducing their price on the gas pump? What's to prevent them from doing some profit taking? We've gotten used to the price. Why wouldn't they keep going that direction? I don't know. I've never been a fan of repealing the gas tax. I think we need it for our infrastructure right now. We've got some transitions we're going to be making over time. But I think the general solution to helping your average Californian is by reducing this great, we have the highest degree of inequality in the country that we've had in 100 years. The last time we had this kind of inequality in the country was the Belle Epoque, pre-1913.
Can we do one more question, you think, Richard? Did anyone have it? Well, I have one that I really wanted to ask you because it's something that I hear from Republican legislators that talk to me. They will talk to me. And, it is something I do hear from the constituents here as well, is this idea that the Democratic legislators in the Assembly and Senate are scared to go against the party. They're scared to go against the party or the caucus, right? Do you see yourself as someone that will stand up to the caucus if you don't agree with what they're saying? If you think that there's a better solution, are you willing to stand up and say, no, I think there's a better idea or something better we can do?
You remember what Tip O'Neill said? There are two things you don't want to see being made. One is sausage, and the other one is legislation. So, look, we live in the United States of America built on a we the people model. I am not naive. We disagree passionately about things. It's one of the things that makes America great. We get to disagree passionately. But it's we the people, not we the political party. It's not we the political party. This is not football. It's not Democrats against Republicans. It's your elected representatives serving you, the folks that cast your vote. I've heard the analogy, and I don't accept it, that the executive is the quarterback and the party is the team. The quarterback calls the play and you run it. How can you live in a country like that? It's a country of winners and losers. The goal of we the people, the goal of a system of compromise, legislative compromise in the way that it's structured in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, in the Assembly, and in the State Senate, is that we come together to wrestle over the issues. And, pardon the newfangled language, but in that process, we should be drawing a Venn diagram, finding out what we can agree on in the center between the two of us. And then the rest of it is horse trading. Quite honestly, when this country ground to a halt, it was because in the Congress, they passed a moratorium on earmarks. Earmarks were the grease of getting legislation done. Earmarks allowed you to hold your nose and vote for a bill that you didn't want because you were able to bring some money home for a project that was going to make a big difference in creating jobs and infrastructure and a variety of other goods. Some folks hated the system. When it was done away with, it was the most transparent system we had out there. But you know what? After they did away with it, Congress ground to a halt. My passion is for the people, and I got to tell you, you don't have to worry about me staking out a long career in politics. It's never been on my life agenda. I'm not that kind of guy. I hope when I'm 90, I'm playing golf or walking with my grandkids or enjoying things, right? I'm not going to be hanging on until the bitter end, until hanging in office. That's not me. And California, by the way, sensibly, I think, passed some term limits. So you get to serve a total of 12 years in the state legislature, whether that's all in the Assembly or in the Senate or some combination of the two, and that's it for you. That's it for you. So if you're worried about your career, if you're worried about your paycheck, you may be more tempted to yield to a caucus, to yield to the political party in order to get elected again. I think our people are tired of that. I think people are tired of that. And I would much rather take my chances in the private sector than to bow on an issue that my constituents have told me is important to them simply because the party or the caucus said, I need to bow. I've never worked that way. I won't work that way. Not with you guys on my back.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Please, I would be humbled and so appreciative to have your vote this election season. And please make sure you vote for the next guy, too. Thanks so much.
All right, Max Steiner coming up next. Running for U.S. Congress.
Correct. Sorry. Do you want more intro?
Oh, no, that's all you.
I was just going to start. Right, so my name is Max Steiner. I'm running for the United States House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. There are many familiar faces here, of course. Some very familiar, including my parents in the back. So I've done a bit in my life. I've fought in the Army. I've been a diplomat, and then I ended up just moving an hour and a half up Highway 99. And I'm off 99 now, so that's kind of the story of my life. I think actually Sacramento is closer to here than Chico is. So they were like, yeah, we'll come up to one candidate night, but not in Reading. That's too far. Although my brother lives there, so who knows. Anyway, so I want to tell you a couple of things. One, I want to give you my background. Then I want to talk about why I'm running. Then I want to talk about the issues that are important, and then we'll kind of break for questions. And I've been taking notes, so hopefully Robert just has one set of questions, because then I'm going to smoke them. But yeah, so I was born in Sacramento, obviously. I joined the Army after high school. I'm a very patriotic person. This was the middle of the Iraq War, so this was 2005, and I thought this was the defining challenge of my generation. And boy, I was wrong, because it turns out the defining challenge of my generation is the attack on democracy. But we'll get to that later. So anyway, I did 4 years in active duty. 2 years of that was in Iraq. I was an infantryman. Many people, I think, justifiably say, well, what does being an infantryman have to do with politics? And it's true. You're not kicking down doors with a pen, ready to write legislation. But what you are doing is you're standing up for your beliefs. And you're showing that you care about America, and that you're not in it for the money. You know, I didn't decide to run for Congress because I wanted to protect my rice subsidy. You know, my opponent's not here, so I can just slam him, and I will. But, you know, I joined because, for the same reason I joined the Army. I saw a problem, and I wanted to solve it. And I think that what I grew up with, what I was blessed with, as a stable political system that was the envy of the world, was under threat, right? And so sure, you know, in my 20s, I thought that we could export that, and I was wrong. And I hope that in my 30s, you know, we can defend that here at home, because we are facing the prospect of democratic collapse. But anyway, in 2009, I left the Army. I went to Berkeley on the GI Bill. I rejoined the Army Reserves, so I'm still a reservist. I'm now doing civil affairs. It's kind of it is more lovey-dovey than the infantry, but that's low bar. But we do refugees in wartime and reconstruction in peacetime. So take of that what you will. That can be a question if you're curious. And then I also joined the diplomatic service. So I met my wife at Cal, and then I became a foreign service officer. I was an ag officer in Honduras, did a lot on agricultural trade. I was a visa officer in Tijuana, Mexico. So I did a lot of visa interviews, over 20,000. You know, you run a little report at the end, and you can see how many you've done. Probably of that, about 10,000 were tourism visas, and about 10,000 were work. You know, so skilled workers and unskilled workers, ag workers. So I have a pretty good understanding of what's going on our border, especially the Mexican border. The Canadian border is very different. But I then became a peacekeeper in Egypt. So, you know, part of diplomacy, I feel like a lot of people who've never been diplomats, which is most Americans, frankly, and that's fine, is that they think that diplomacy ends with a signature on a treaty and a photo op, and everyone shakes hands and they go home. And it's not, right? Diplomacy is ongoing. Peace is ongoing. We have an ongoing commitment in the Middle East because of the Camp David Accords. You know, we still have American lives at risk enforcing a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. And that is our greatest success in the Middle East, right? We took something with a very low target. We did not try to remake Egyptian democracy. We did not try to fix Israel-Palestinian issue. But we looked at, you know, 4 wars between 1947 and 1973 and said, well, we can stop that. And so we did. But, you know, part of peacekeeping is that you're still observing. We lost a helicopter 2 years ago, lost 9 people, 5 of which were Americans. So I don't want to give you the false impression that peace is somehow costless, right? War takes a lot of lives, far more. But peace takes lives as well. And this is something that we as Americans need to understand when we are asking ourselves as a country to take on a leadership role in the world. But I want to make this very clear. We should be taking on that leadership role in the world. Because if it is not us, then who? But such a transition back to my history, right? I went to D.C. I was a food security officer. So basically deciding where do we send aid abroad, which we send much of. And that's great. But I left. My wife, by that time, was making twice my salary. So, you know, life pro tip, marry someone smarter than you and use half of your GI Bill to meet her and half of your GI Bill to send her to get an MBA. And that works out great. So I left. I went to work at RAND. RAND is a defense think tank. And I was working on basically defense and diplomacy issues in the Western Pacific and Eastern Europe. You can ask about that if you like as well. So why am I running? So that's kind of phase 1, like who am I? Phase 2 is, you know, why am I running? And the answer to that is January 6th, right? Like, yes, I have a career of service. Yes, I'm very invested in America. I've got a strong background in international relations. You know, I've got more exposure to agricultural trade than 99.5% of Americans because I was an ag officer in Honduras. You know, I am well fit for this district. But I'm not running because, you know, I'm got delusions of grandeur. I'm running because on January 6th, we had an attack on our democratic process. And we cannot let that stand. Because I have seen in Iraq what happens when we have democracy just be the round 1. Just be the first skirmish of a transition of political power. Because if democracy, if it's not settled with ballots, you know, a struggle for power will be settled with bullets. And we do not want that here. I do not want to be picking up the bodies of my countrymen like I picked up the bodies of Iraqis with their fingers still stained in purple. So I'm very invested, as you can tell, and I saw Doug LaMalfa lie about an election that his side lost. And it's fine to be upset when your side loses elections. I get it. It happens to at least half of everyone running for office. But you need to understand that being a good sport is important when you're on the basketball, court, but it's existential when you're in politics. And lying about an election you lose just because you don't want to admit to yourself that you've lost, that undermines the very foundations of our democracy. We have a democratic system that allows us to disagree with each other. That's the whole reason you would have democracy. There's no reason to have government if everyone, thinks the same way. You can have a king, if everyone thinks the same, it doesn't matter. Pick one guy, everyone thinks the same. But the glory of democracy is that we can all disagree, but we have one system by which we will settle that disagreement. And it's the system that's important. And that means that on November 8th this year, everyone will cast a ballot, and those ballots will be counted, and the number of ballots will determine who wins the election. And we saw that break down in 2020. And then we saw Trump incite a riot when he didn't want to admit that he had lost. And even after that riot, my opponent decided that he was going to vote against certification. And that is why I'm running, because that cannot stand. That is pure political cowardice, and it is dangerous. So, I wish that he was on stage tonight so he could answer for his cowardice, so he could explain why he thought that an election that had been certified by 60 court cases through January 6th was somehow in question, but he's not, because, he's a coward, again, to reiterate. He's afraid to run on his record, he's afraid to run on what he's done, and he doesn't have a plan for America going forward. So he just has an R next to his name, and he is counting on that to carry him across the finish line. So that's kind of block 2, right? Why I'm running. Block 3, I'll just try to preempt some questions. So my priorities are really on forestry and on water and on fire. So my, fire and forestry are related. My brother lost his house in the car fire in Redding in 2018. We have very poorly managed forests. I've talked to a lot of foresters, be they government, be they ex-smoke jumpers, be they private sector, landowners and timber operators. And everyone agrees that our forests are overgrown, that the pendulum has swung from clear cutting in the 80s to no cutting today, and it's just as bad. And we need to bring it back to balance. We need to go back to sustainable forest management. We need to chop down a lot of trees. We can restart the timber industry. That will drive down fire risks. It will generate jobs. It will be better for the forests themselves. There are a lot of benefits that we can have, but we need to put in policies that work. And I think it's very clear that I will say, environmental focused policies of the last 30 years, since 1990, really, have not worked. They have not led to good environmental outcomes. No matter what their intentions were, we can say that losing 35% of California forests to medium and high intensity fires over the last decade is not sustainable, and it is not good for the environment. And that the no treatment alternative on a NEPA timber harvesting plan is not that the forest just stays overgrown, it's that the forest burns. And we cannot have forests that burn with the intensity of the last 5 years, the last 10 years, right? We've had a good fire year so far, thank God. But last year we didn't. Right? We had Dixie Fire, a 1 million acre fire. We had the Calder Fire, almost destroyed South Lake Tahoe. These are insane escalations in fire. 20 years ago, a massive fire was 25,000 acres. Now that's a tiny fire, right? A massive fire now is something over 200,000 acres. And so part of this is climate change, but part of this is just timber harvest management, right? It's just we are not managing our forests correctly, and we're going to need to take a tough look at the policies that we are enacting to get to the outcomes that we want and whether we have that match. So that's forestry. On fire, there's a lot that we can do as a federal government to drive down fire risk, but frankly it comes down to hiring people, buying equipment, and utilizing them correctly, right? And we need to spend a lot more money on all 3 of those things. So we have a culture in the Forest Service that's kind of moved towards managed fire. We need to go back to aggressive initial attack. We need to be attacking fires where they start. Listen, prescribed fire is great. Fire is a tool. But using fire that just starts naturally as a way to, kind of obviate responsibility because we want to get good fire and we'll risk some bad fire to do it, that's not appropriate, okay? Managed fire can easily escape. We saw that in Tamarack fire 2 years ago. Just like prescribed fire can escape if it's used poorly, as we saw in New Mexico earlier this year. So So that's kind of like the scope on fire. I know I'm short on time, so I'll move on. Water's the other issue, right? And you'll notice a theme, climate, right? Climate change, by the way, real. My opponent doesn't believe it. He's not here. But trust me, he doesn't. He thinks it's all, oh, it's just, yeah, I believe in climate change. I think his quote is, there's winter, spring, and fall, which is moronic, right? It's just, that's embarrassing. Let's not send an embarrassment to Congress, at least. But climate change is having impact, right? We are seeing that we are going to have longer dry periods, longer droughts. And even when we have rain, or precipitation, we're going to have more rain and less snow. Both of these things will put stress on a hydrologic system that California depends on. My grandfather's brother was deputy director of DWR. Our state was built on water. Everyone thinks like, oh yeah, California is built by gold miners. No, gold miners came here, but it was moving water around that made us a state of 40 million people with the 5th largest agricultural sector in the world. We have more agriculture by value than any other state in the United States. I mean, like, this is an amazing state, but it all depends on water. And, we've got a lot of mountains, and we've got a really productive valley, and then we have one outlet, okay? And that kind of creates some risk. Sacramento is the 2nd most likely city to flood in the United States after New Orleans. That's why you build dams. That's why we build levees everywhere. And climate change is going to change, a little bit of change. 1 or 2 degrees, that can be the difference between a foot of snowfall and 3 inches of rain. And 3 inches of rain is a lot more dangerous than a foot of snow. So, I just want us all to think about this. Are dams environmentally costless? No, of course not. Do they have a fiscal cost? Yes, absolutely. But we're going to have to think about how we as a state deal with, climate change, and especially how climate's going to affect our water. So that's going to mean more dams. It's going to mean more federal spending on water. And a lot of that's going to have environmental costs, and a lot of it will have fiscal costs. And I promise as your congressman that I will address those environmental costs thoughtfully and not just ignore them or denigrate them like my opponent. And then I will address those fiscal costs, like in a spirit of, working with Sacramento, which sounds crazy, but you can actually do that, right? Doug LaMalfa likes to talk about Sacramento like it's a foreign occupying power, and it's not, all right? Sacramento, you're going to need state government buy-in on any major dam or any major levee or any major hydrological system in our state, all right? And you can get money from Sacramento. You can get buy-in. And Doug does not know how to generate that buy-in. I have been a diplomat. I will use that word. But it means, building a consensus and saying, like, yes, I know that you're nervous about this environmental cost, and this is why I think this. And it doesn't mean going to Sacramento and saying, I know I'm right, and I'm a conservative, and you guys hate America. Because unsurprisingly, that does not work, okay? So if you want more dams in the North State, if you want more investment in the North State, vote for someone that can go to Sacramento and make friends and not enemies. So I've kind of talked about my background. I've talked about why I'm running, and I've talked about what I want to do. And this is a great time for you to tell me or ask me, you can do either, what you want to see, or what you're seeing now that's giving you concern. And let me put your mind at ease. So thank you very much for coming. I apologize that my opponent did not show. But unsurprisingly, my opponent is not very invested in the democratic process, and this is just exhibit, 80.
Do I have any questions? Oh, well, good, because I only have a couple.
Oh, wow, all right, well, let's fire
Lovely.
them off.
Okay, what's your position on 1, gun control, 2, the opioid crisis? What's your position on gun control, the opioid crisis, and racial relations?
Great, so gun control we'll start with first. I am a fairly pro-gun Democrat. I will contextualize that. I am the top-rated Democrat for the CRPA, that's the California Rifle Pistol Association, and I got a D, right? So everyone, readjust your standards based on that. But listen, I think the answer to gun control, we're going to need to do better background checks. We're going to need better red flag laws. That means taking guns away from people that shouldn't have them, i.e., you make a threatening statement on Facebook, and you should get your guns seized. For 2 weeks, if a family member reports you as mentally unstable, sure, let's make a process by which we can take your guns away. California has a system, it's called GVRO, Gun Violence Restraining Order. No reason not to make that national. I think we need a national registry of guns, right? There's nothing in the Second Amendment that says it's anonymous. There are many constitutional rights that require you to register, including voting, right? So there's this conception that like anything that touches the Second Amendment is somehow tyranny, and it's not. The Second Amendment is built to protect your right to bear arms. It's not about, hey, I want to protect right to bear arms and I don't want the government to know. All right, that's not it. But what it doesn't mean is hardware, right? I don't think the answer comes from regulating the AR-15. I think that a lot of liberals, and I'll diffuse this or try first, focus on this because it generates headlines. And listen, don't fall for the headline effect. 80% of gun deaths are handguns. 50% of gun deaths are suicides. Rifles, which includes semi-automatic rifles, were 4% of gun deaths. And, okay, it's a very small proportion, and it generates the headlines, but it's kind of like, hey, I want to travel to see my sister in New Orleans. Well, I'd better drive because airplanes are dangerous. And it turns out that airplanes are the safest mode of travel, and assault weapons are some of the most, well, people that buy assault weapons are some of the safest gun owners, because we have 4 million AR-15s in circulation. And, you know, I can count on one hand how many times they've been used in mass shootings this year. And yes, every mass shooting is a problem. And every kid that dies is a problem. But let's not get myopically focused on something that is not driving the death of children, right? Because kids die now because they find their father's unsecured handgun and they don't know what they're doing with a weapon and they shoot themselves. And I think the answer to that lies in making sure that handgun is secured properly. That means educating the parent, but it also means educating the kid. I went to school, my high school was McClatchy. It was a 1930s Works Projects Administration School, beautiful building. And under this, basically the math hallway, was a rifle range, right? We used to do gun training in schools. It used to be a requirement, kind of like how you have to know how to swim to graduate high school in California. You had to handle a weapon, kind of in PE. And that sounds wild to us now, but I swear to you, like, we use that room, ROTC, JROTC, uses it to store uniforms now. But, you know, they've got a huge arms-safe, door on it, right? And it's a 100-meter long hallway. And, you know, like, this is something that we should be thinking about. Like, how do we make sure that kids aren't killing themselves? And how do we make sure that, you know, like, people aren't committing suicide with weapons that they shouldn't have access to? So that's number one, right? So I'll move on. Number two was opiates and fentanyl. Listen, we have an opiate epidemic in this country. It was caused by the Sacklers. There was a real push to zero out pain. We started to see that fix itself, which is great, and the Sacklers are under investigation now. Fentanyl is the new problem, and this is basically an imported, opiate-like drug that's really causing a disaster on our streets. And meth is another problem, right? So how do we do drug regulation in the United States? It involves securing our borders to make it harder to bring drugs across the border. It means prioritizing the drugs that we do enforce. I think we should legalize federal marijuana, and that opens up the DEA to be able to focus on drugs that are actually causing problems. Yeah, sure, I'll let you clap. Regulating weed, I don't get it, right? People don't kill other people when they're high on pot, all right? That's not a thing. Yeah, and I will just say, regulating weed has other effects. I'm in the Army Reserves. I've had to chapter out 3 people in my career for popping hot on piss. And, a piss test. We drug test in the Army Reserves, and part of being in the Army Reserves is that you don't take drugs. So I don't take drugs. That's crazy. Like, we're losing good soldiers that we don't have to lose because they smoke some pot. I don't understand, right? So making too many things illegal is problematic because, one, it reduces the effort that you can put on things that really should be illegal, like fentanyl. And 2, it's because you catch people doing something bad and you penalize them when really, they could use a slap on the wrist, right? Like, I'm far more worried about my soldiers that are alcoholics than my soldiers that smoke pot when they're not on drill, right? Anyone shows up to drill, like, high on pot, they're going to get in a lot of trouble. So I want to assure you that that doesn't happen. Your third question, though, I've already forgotten, and I'm sorry. Oh, racial relations. Yeah, we're in a tense time. I think it's very important. I think it's important to see that the Republican Party, many actors within the Republican Party, because I don't want to paint too broad a brush. Many actors within the Republican Party are kind of dialing up racial tension. And I think that's really wrong, right? We should always be aware of our racial history as this country and be aware that we always need to dial down racial tension. And that's what I would bring to Washington, right? Listen, I'm not going to tell you that I have the answer as a white man to this question, right? Because I do not. But I can tell you that I want kids to learn that slavery is bad and that we locked up Japanese Americans and violated their rights, and that many Americans today still feel like their government doesn't respect them because of the color of their skin, and that's something that we need to work on. But I don't think that this is an answer that's going to be imposed by a government. Like, we're not going to be able to make a policy and say, like, we have fixed race. Okay, this is a long and cultural issue, and all we should ask of politicians is to make sure that they are not making it worse.
Got some other questions?
Hi. Oops, yes. So one of the problems that our county has is with FEMA. We've recently redone the levees so that they are up higher to a 200-year level, flood level, but still the biggest problem we're having is, so if somebody's house burns down in the area, they can't rebuild that house because of FEMA regulations. And evidently it takes a long time for FEMA to redo those maps so that people are having a hard time trying to get any kind of insurance in that area. Is there anything that you think that you could do on a federal level? Because that's, obviously we can't do anything about that here. It's got to be done at the federal level to kind of assist, because that's really what's kind of hindering a lot of people that live in the rural area of Sutter County.
Yeah, so I want to make one thing absolutely clear. As your representative, I will protect the right of Americans to keep their rural houses, and I will protect the rural character of our district, right? Like, sure, if Chico wants to grow, great, but I'm not going to try to depopulate. There's this term that's recently been making the waves on social media, on Twitter, right? Because I'm on Twitter all the time, me and Kevin Gallagher, is that that's a throwback for anyone that missed it. This idea of managed retreat, right? So you saw it out of Florida, like, oh, let's just not rebuild Florida. You kind of saw it after the Paradise, like, let's just not rebuild towns like Paradise. And I want to make this very clear. We are not going to retreat from our rural communities. We're going to manage our rural communities better. So that's number one. So that's the objective, right? So number two, how do we make that happen? And so the federal government has two primary ways that it interacts with disaster victims. Number one is through FEMA, which gets a lot of criticism, and it's deserved. But it is, frankly, FEMA is the short-term assistance. It is hard to turn on assistance on a short term without fraud. And that's why FEMA tends to wait too long. But you're right, waiting 90 days to get access to a trailer. If you don't have home insurance, you're homeless after 20 days, or you're really annoying your in-laws after 10. So, we need to streamline the FEMA system. We need to give states money. We need to give counties money so they can start housing people in local hotels until FEMA trailers arrive. We need to make FEMA a lot more proactive and, staff the call center. One of the things we've seen out of Florida is that the FEMA call center shuts down. And of course, you don't want to staff a FEMA call center to handle a Hurricane Ian level event or a Camp Fire level event at all times. But they need to have contracts on standby so that they can pull in a call center. Governments do this all the time. Like we write contingent contracts and we say, hey, subcontractor A, I want you to be able to turn on 1,000 people to answer the telephone at any given time. And I want to be able to do that within 48 hours. And I will pay you a retainer, of millions of dollars a year. It's not free to make this happen, right? And then when I use you, I'm going to be paying you millions more. So that's one, right? Make FEMA faster and accept a higher risk of fraud, because people's lives are upended, and we can do that, right? So the other big program that handles, that often doesn't get any credit or blame, both of which is deserved, is housing and urban development, right? So those are the long-term reconstruction, right? Those are the big grants that help counties rebuild cities, help counties and cities rebuild communities. And that's something that we need to approach as a government and do so intelligently. Sure, we're not going to build back Paradise the same way that it was burned. We're not going to build back after Hurricane Ian the same way. But there's this idea that the government should be there as the ultimate backstop, and we should allow people to regain their previous lives with dignity, or if they don't want it, and not everyone does, to be able to move somewhere else and start anew, again, with dignity. I will add one more thing. Flooding, especially in California, it's not like we have hurricanes. When we have flooding in California, it's because the Army Corps of Engineers has messed up, right? Because that's who's in charge of our water. And when we have fire in California, it's generally because the U.S. Forest Service has messed up. And these are federal institutions, and so there is federal blame. Yes, it's always a natural disaster. Too much rain at a given time, a lightning strike at a bad time, a public utility company that no one likes. It's fine, but we need to understand that there's a federal liability here. If not legal, then at least moral. And we as a federal government, and you should be sending people to represent you in a federal government, should be there to look out for the residents that are paying the price. I will also say, my opponent likes to brag, who's not here, right? So empty chair moment. My opponent likes to brag that he's helping Paradise Fire victims avoid the tax liability, right? So PG&E made a payout, and whenever you get a legal settlement, now you have to pay taxes on that payout. I want to make this very clear. That was not Doug LaMalfa's idea. The bill was sponsored by Mike Thompson. He's a Democrat out of Napa County. This was a Democratic plan. So whenever you hear Doug LaMalfa saying, I'm looking out for the residents of Paradise because I'm not going to make them pay the taxes on their PG&E settlement, that's the Democratic Party in action. Doug LaMalfa is just chasing that coattail. Sorry, kind of coughed in the middle. Doug LaMalfa is chasing that coattail. So as your representative, I would look out for residents, right? I would be another champion like Mike Thompson. And I wouldn't make the residents of Paradise wait 4 years to find out that, yes, they're not going to have to pay taxes, because you have to be proactive. And I would be a proactive representative for the North State. Did that answer the question? I'll take it. Okay.
When I look around this audience, I feel that both of you are due an apology. To think that we in Yuba City can, maybe 30 people show up? We could have held this debate in a telephone booth like they used to talk about. But I think it's great that you do take the time to come down here and speak to us. I would like to tell each people, one of the things that I tried to do was I phoned up LaMalfa's office 3 times. First 2 times, the answer I got was that Mr. LaMalfa can't go down to a debate in Yuba City because he does not belong to Yuba City, which was true. At that time, he was in a different district. But it was a nice way for them to get past me. So the 3rd time I phoned them, they told me this, and I said, yeah, I love that. It's great that he doesn't belong to the community, so I hope the community does not vote for him. And the person hung up on me. Now, what I would say is that I would like to think that even a group like this here, get on the phone Monday morning, phone up Gallagher's office, phone up LaMalfa's office, and say, okay, you didn't show up on a Friday night, would you show up on a Tuesday night? And phone them again, and phone them again. And this is the only way we're going to get anything to happen. I hope that I can come through right. I'm too damn old to be in these offices, okay? But I would think it's up to the public to do something. We sit back and bitch and moan and expect somebody like you to go back to Washington and do something on our behalf when we can't do anything for ourselves.
Yeah, so one, thank you very much for that sentiment. I share it completely. I wish that politicians were more responsive. I see 2 county supervisors, 2 local supervisors in the audience right now. I see Carm Baines, from Sutter County. I see Gary Bradford from Yuba County. This is what responsible politics looks like. And I know I've had, coffee with Gary, and I disagree with him on some things, and we agree on others. And, Carm, I'm sure we disagree because we're Americans, and we don't have to go to somewhere because we agree with everyone that's going to be there. But you go there because you're representing them, and you are there to listen to them. And I promise that as your representative, I will be far more approachable than Doug LaMalfa, and I mean, it's a low bar, but I will be far more. And like, believe me when I say it, you know, like, I want to listen to people. I spent this afternoon, you know, at the Walmart in Yuba City, not Yuba City, in Yuba County, right? So not in Marysville, as Gary points out. One of the reasons Marysville has a tax problem. You know, and I was out there just handing out flyers. You know, I was there for 6 hours. And, you know, I will say that the crowd outside of Walmart skewed a little right compared to, obviously, like this hall. But it's important, you know, like 1 in probably 50 people stops and talks and says, well, I'm really upset at the Democrats for this, or I'm really upset at the government for this. And it's important to go and talk to people and just make yourself available and say, like, I am here and I'm here and I will fight for you if you vote for me, and I'll fight for you if I get elected and you didn't vote for me. But right now, I want to listen to your concerns and I want to try to solve them, or at least explain how I would solve them were I to be elected. So that's my message, is that yes, it is a shame that neither Gallagher nor LaMalfa are here. It is irresponsible, and it's breaking one of the fundamental norms of our electoral process, which is that people should get to hear the representatives defend in person what they have done and what they will do. And we're not seeing that. And two, you know, we're seeing good examples of politicians that do care. You know, not just, you know, David and I who are running, but people who have been elected and are saying, like, here are some energized, politically minded people, and they're going to be asking questions to people who are not me, but this event isn't about me. It's about the people that are asking the questions. You know, I went to the Oroville City, the city in Butte County, had a candidates night yesterday for its city council, for its mayor, and for a treasurer, I think, or some board. And, you know, like, they got asked questions, and I went, and I wasn't on the stage. But, you know, you go there because that's what the people of Oroville care about, because the questions that those people are going to be asked are the questions that may not be relevant at the federal level, but definitely reflect the concerns of your constituents. And I think that that's important. So those are kind of the 3 points that I wanted to make on that question. Thank you.
Hello. So my concern is gas prices currently. The United States is sanctioning 3 of the top oil-producing countries, Russia, Venezuela, and Iran. If you are elected, would you work to end this aggressive sanction policy if it helps save American consumers gas money?
So the short answer to that is no. There's some talk of rapprochement with Venezuela. I think that's the most likely that we would reach out to it. We're definitely not going to relax pressure on Russia right now. It has just launched an invasion a little over 200 days ago of Ukraine. So Russia's kind of off the table for a while. Sorry, Putin, if you're listening, I'm not a dove. The second is Iran. Iran has recently had a number of protests. This is not the time to relax. It would come across, diplomatically speaking, as if we supported the Iranian regime against the righteously angry women of Iran who are protesting the death of a 23-year-old Iranian woman who was killed for not wearing her headscarf. So that's off, right? Venezuela, yeah, you know, they had a coup. It's not a democracy. You know, we all wish that Juan Guaido had taken power. He did not. And so, you know, we will have to address that, and we'll have to, at some point, relax our embargo of Venezuela. That's going to be a decision taken at the top levels. It's not Congress. That's an executive branch decision. But I'm just kind of setting the stage for you diplomatically. I will go to talk about gas prices, though, because I'll pivot. So that's kind of the international side, because I'm an international guy. But gas prices, energy security is national security. And the Democrats have done a terrible job on gas. And I want to make this very clear. Like, this is something that I differ from the Democratic Party on. And I know that many of you are Democrats, and we will disagree, and we will disagree constructively. Because I don't take this as an opportunity to score points, right? I follow Doug LaMalfa and Gallagher's Twitter, and they use gas prices as a way to dunk on their opponents, right? But when they were in office, they did not do anything to make us more energy secure. Part of energy security is transitioning to non-oil products, you know, non-oil energy, right? That means more dams, you know, it means more solar, it means more wind, it means more nuclear, right? Something that we are not at the whimsy of the international markets. But a lot of energy security for the next 30 years will mean domestic production. You know, California used to be we used to make more oil in California than Saudi Arabia, okay? My grandfather was not the one who worked in dams, that's another one. But my grandfather was he was a petroleum engineer for the California Department of Geology, the California Geologic Survey. So there's two stories there. One is that he drilled under Sites Reservoir to check that if there's oil there, and there's not. So guys, rest assured, if we fill Sites Reservoir with water, we're not jeopardizing oil. But two is that there is a lot of oil in California. You know, Kern County, Bakersfield, a lot of oil there. LA, still a major oil producer, even though it's urban. There's many oil pumps in production under LA right now. I think it's like over 2,500. You know, California has opportunities to expand oil production. North America has opportunities to expand oil production. And when we expand oil production, we will be providing oil to our allies in Europe and allow them to wean themselves off Russian oil, which is bad. We will be giving oil to our allies in the Western Pacific, such as Japan and South Korea, who need oil for their economies. I think there's been this real push in the Democratic Party to virtue signal on energy, to say, we are going to solve climate and forget about the political consequences. And guess what? Political consequences are important, because if you're too busy virtue signaling, you will not be in power, and you will not be enacting any policy at all. So I want to close with that, you know, yeah, you'll disagree, many of you will disagree with me on that, and many of you will, you know, want to be driving electric cars in the future, and that's fine. Go drive electric cars. But, you know, like, there's so much that oil does for our economy and for the economy of our allies that I really want you to leave with the thought that energy security is national security, and kind of view our production decisions through that lens.
All right. Well, I have a question. Oh, actually, we had a viewer question. They were basically asking, you know, what measures or I guess legislation would you support or push for just to make living more affordable?
Yeah, you know, part of this is energy, so I won't address that again. But yes, energy is important. It's a real big driver of inflation. The other thing is reevaluating what regulations are important and what regulations really strangle growth. So we see that in California, not to steal David's answer, but, you know, it came up earlier. You know, we talk about housing. Housing is very expensive in California because there's a lot of compliance costs. You know, a house in California costs basically twice per square foot what a house costs in Georgia. We'll just take that as an example. And that's bad, all right? Like, at some point, the cost that you're paying in, you know, making a house greener or making a house more sustainable are pricing people out of the market. And we need to understand that people need to be able to afford a home first before we can make that home perfect. And so we've kind of, as a Democratic Party, let perfection become the enemy of good enough. And I think that's really something we need to reevaluate. We need to take a long and hard look about the regulations that we're enacting and seeing, are those leading to the outcomes that we want? I talked about NEPA earlier, the National Environmental Policy Act, and how it's really killed the lumber industry in the North State, and how with the death of the lumber industry, our forests are not managed at all, and how an unmanaged forest is a huge fire risk. And that's bad for communities that are nearby because they face, you know, higher insurance rates. It's bad when it burns because those communities sometimes burn away, right? We saw that with Greenville. We saw that with Paradise. You know, I know that David lost houses in Magalia. But it's also bad for the broader environment. You know, California, last year, not this year, but last year, our emissions as a state, forest fires caused more emissions than personal automobiles, right? Because we had so much burning. And that's not a good policy outcome, okay? So we need to reevaluate, was this push towards environmentally friendly regulation? Did it go too far? And did it kill the industry that we need? You know, there's this, I really want to stress something. As a politician, I care about balance and I care about incrementalism, and that I am a moderate guy, and that I am much more concerned about the outcome of the, you know, of the legislation than the intent. You know, there's a lot of idealists that care about the intent of legislation, about like, how does this present? And we really need to elect more politicians that care about what does this legislation do 5, 10, 15 years down the line. And that's what I'll bring to Washington, right? It's a comprehensive look at what regulations we have on the books and an analysis of why things are so expensive in a way that's really hurting Americans' purchasing power. Because we're not going to solve this by increasing the minimum wage, all right, guys? Like, Like, sure, like you can increase the minimum wage a little bit. Yeah, it's a shame that the minimum wage in 1971 is the equivalent of $12 today, but the federal minimum wage is $7.25. But I saw this guy, next to me today at Walmart collecting signatures because fast food workers are going to be paid $22 an hour. These are Band-Aids, right? Like, these are supply side problems, and we are trying to fix them through salaries, and that is not the answer. So, I think that answers that question. I'm just going to pretend that answered that question. But yeah, like, look at regulations. Why are things expensive? Try to drive down the cost and balance the regulatory goals with the regulatory impacts. So I saw a question there.
Wait till we get the microphone to you.
Yes, I do have a question. I was going to direct it to your opponent. And he's not here. So my question to him was, why did he challenge the 2020 election results, even though the Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, had urged him not to? And even after there's been no judge, no justice, no fact finder that ever found that there was a problem with an election, why is he still currently continuing with the big lie? Okay, he's not here. The next reason, which is a very important one to me because I'm an old lady, and I've paid into Social Security and Medicare since I was a teenager. Why did he vote to cut? And I had to write this down. He voted to cut Medicare by over $500 billion. I couldn't believe it. And he cut services for taxpayers, funds for veterans, money for infrastructure and education, and he voted against the Violence Against Women Act, okay? So, I guess my question to you is, are you going to help take care of Social Security and Medicare in the future?
The short answer to that is yes.
Thank you.
On most of those sub-questions, right, I care about Social Security. I will protect it. I care about Medicare. I'll protect it. You mentioned the Violence Against Women Act. I would have voted for that. I think it's very important. We'll branch a little bit off that into women's rights. So I am pro-choice. I think Roe v. Wade was a good compromise. Listen, like, yeah, I'm a fairly conservative Catholic, and I totally understand that not everyone who is, pro-life is a bad person. I see that a lot on the left, that they're somehow forced birthers. And I want to caution everyone, that is not the language to think about this issue. Sure, there are some very chauvinistic people who are pro-life, all right? But the vast majority of people that are pro-life, who I have met and interacted with, are just, they've made a different moral choice, right? And I come from a background that is render unto Caesar what is Caesar, render unto God what is God, right? So you make a personal religious decision and you realize that the law of the land is secular and it will be very different than what you personally want. So that's why I'm pro-choice. I think Roe v. Wade, viability, 23 weeks, was a good compromise, and I think it should be federal law. On abortion, sorry, I kind of fumbled that. On abortion, my opponent claims that this is a states' rights issue, but he's lying. Right? My opponent lies about a lot of things, right? But on this, we can tell, because when he says this is a states' rights issue and you don't have to worry in California, if you are concerned about being pro-choice in California, you should be very concerned about Doug LaMalfa. He's the co-sponsor of a bill called fetal personhood that would outlaw abortions at any time. That means day one. It means plan B, the day after pill, outlawed, all right? Because once a zygote is fertilized, once an egg is fertilized, it's murder to stop that process. It also means, incidentally, that IVF, in vitro fertilization, would not be allowed, right? And so there are a lot of women who have trouble conceiving that Doug LaMalfa would throw under the bus because he thinks it's politically popular. And I think that's completely inappropriate, right? I think if someone wants to buy Plan B, I think that should be their right as an American. And on that, I disagree with my opponent. But I just want to emphasize that it is lying to go on TV, to go on social media and say this is a states' rights issue, even as you are the co-sponsor on record of a bill that would make it a federal crime to take the day after pill. That is wrong, okay? So that is a big difference between me and my opponent. The other big difference on health, because you asked, is the PACT Act, right? So my opponent initially voted against legislation that would protect Agent Orange and burn pit survivors for the VA. And yes, it is a massive expansion of the VA. It's the biggest expansion of the VA in 40 years, all right? But we've just gone through 2 major wars. We have a generation of veterans, the Vietnam generation, that are starting to retire and starting to need more medical care, right? The VA will cost more money in the future. And that is because of political decisions that were taken in the 60s and then again in the 2000s, all right? And people like me went overseas because we thought the government had our backs. And it hurts when people like La Malfa, who like to wave the flag and claim that they are patriotic, but who have never served, decide that veterans are good while they're overseas, but as soon as they come home, they're not my problem, right? It was kind of like, I didn't like Trump, let's be clear, up front. But Trump said something about John McCain, which was like, I like my war heroes to not be captured. And it's just incredibly disrespectful for someone who dodged the draft as a rich guy from New York City claiming that he had bone spurs to throw someone like John McCain under the bus. And I'll be honest, I voted for John McCain, so that tells you a little bit about me politically, that I could vote for John McCain, and Sarah Palin didn't like as much, over Obama, who I thought was inexperienced. But, we need that kind of moderate. So I care about the PACT Act. And then I'm just going to wax poetically about John McCain because he's one of my political heroes. John McCain, I want to take you guys back to 2008, right? Did we have a far right in 2008? Absolutely. Did many of you guys vote for John McCain? Probably not. That's all right. But you know what? There are clips of John McCain on YouTube if you want to feel inspired about what the GOP could be and used to be, where hecklers in the crowd say stuff like, Barack Obama's a Muslim, or Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States. And John McCain, to his everlasting credit, said, no, ma'am. Barack Obama's a good man. No, ma'am, Barack Obama's an American citizen. That is what political leadership looks like, all right? And that is something that the modern GOP has forgotten. And that kind of willful ignorance, that kind of fear of your voters, that inability to show political leadership is why, I have such a problem with the GOP of today. It's not just not showing up to debates. It's going only to people that already think like you, and it's telling them what they want to hear and radicalizing them even more. And that's not what we need from our politicians. We need politicians to be leaders. We need our politicians to be people who will say, no, ma'am, that's not true. You are mistaken. All right? And if I'm elected, I'm going to be that kind of politician. And you've kind of heard it tonight, where we disagree on a lot of stuff. But I'm engaging with you respectfully. And I'm saying, no, ma'am, I am a pro-gun Democrat. Or, no, ma'am, I have this concern about forestry. But that's what I want, right? So we'll kind of time that. But that's kind of like a side question that just came up, right? What does political leadership mean? And why does the GOP of today not have it?
All right.
Hello, Max. So this is like a two-pronged question, and I'm just going to add some context. Living in Sutter County without a hospital, with lack of health care, what would you do for Sutter County residents in the healthcare sector? And the second prong of the question is, do you support a single-payer healthcare system nationwide, something to the tune of Medicare for all, or one of its variants?
Great. So thank you for those two questions. I'm so sorry. This is Cruz Mora. He's running for city council in Live Oak. So I meant to thank all the politicians out. As Cruz, if you live in Live Oak, great. If you don't live in Live Oak, tell your friends. So to answer your two questions, I'll answer number 2 first because it's very easy. No, I'm not in favor of Medicare for all, and no, I'm not in favor of single payer. This is 18% of our national GDP is healthcare. It's a huge problem that we spend so much on health, right? I'm a very pro-defense guy, right? So, but defense is 3% of our GDP. If we save a little bit in health, we can afford a lot more militarily. And guys, we live in dangerous times. Like, you're not going to find me cutting defense spending, right? But if we could get, Britain spends 9% of GDP on health. If we can cut our GDP on health down to Britain, that's 2.5 defense budgets. That's pretty good, okay? Like, I would be very happy with that. That's not needed. But I'm telling you, yes, I realize there's a problem, but the scale of the problem dwarfs any simple fix like saying Medicare for all. Like, what healthcare reforms I would push for is pricing transparency, so that you know what you're going to pay when you go to a hospital, that hospitals have to be upfront about your post-insurance rate so you can shop around. It means putting in government basically price sets for emergency care, because if you're suffering a heart attack, you're not shopping around, right? So you're saying, hey, a hospital on average will cost this much in this kind of either rural or urban, you can bifurcate it out area, and this is how much we're going to charge someone who's having a heart attack. Doesn't matter what hospital you go to. I don't want people driving long distance to a hospital trying to get a better deal, right? But I also want people to be able to know what they're going to pay when they're asking for a service. And we're not seeing that now. So that's kind of my two answers on healthcare. Is that one, it's too big to solve with something so simple as Medicare for all or single payer. And two, there are small things that we can do. And then to talk about locally, right? So one, Sutter County is hurting on health. I don't know if there's anyone here from Colusa, but Colusa has a big measure, I think it's Measure A, to basically pay for just one ambulance to be on standby in the county at any time, because they don't have a hospital either. Rural health is a huge problem, and it's a problem throughout our district. And this is something that at some point, the federal government should be willing to step up and pay for through grants, right? And that's not going to say, like, we're going to build you a hospital, right? But it's saying that, yes, it's a problem, and yes, we need to be able to staff and try to solve that problem and recognize that these smaller, more rural communities don't have the funds to pay for it themselves. So that answers your question there, the two of them.
All right. We have time for one more. Did anyone have? I got a quick one. I can just. So you're the pro-gun guy. Assault weapons are okay. So you would be against a federal assault ban?
Correct.
Ban? So you think it's appropriate for? Why do you think it's appropriate for an American to have a high-capacity rifle like that?
So I think it's in line with the Second Amendment. I have a very broad understanding of constitutional protections. Sorry, I'll just talk forward because otherwise the mic, but I am talking to you.
Oh, you don't have to talk to me.
Yeah, great. So, sorry, I don't want to turn my back on you. But, we should have an expansive view of constitutional protections, all right? And I know it sounds, kind of like a trope. Guy in Army likes guns. But there's also that, right? Like, I didn't touch a gun. My parents back there, we did not have guns at home. They do not like guns. But, we have a constitution. We have a Bill of Rights. And it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So obviously, there are reasonable restrictions on every constitution. You can't spell fire in a movie theater. You can't own automatic weapons. But we drew that line. We drew that line as a people, and we said, like, our line on the Second Amendment is going to be automatic weapons. So there's that. I said, one, if you want to ban assault weapons, which are the small arms equivalent of a musket, just brought forward to 2022. No one's saying we're gonna, have a cannon in your house or have an artillery piece or have an NLAW, right? That's wild, right? But also, kind of what I talked about earlier is that if you want to reduce gun deaths, if you want to focus on the outcomes and not the headlines, then you should be looking at handguns and you should be looking at mental health and you should be looking at background checks. And that's what I want to do. And I think that's politically achievable. And I think that's far more in line with the Constitution than trying to ban a category of weapons that just makes you scared. And I recognize that you are afraid, and I respect that. But I will tell you that the M4 has been a part of my life for 17 years, and it's a great weapon system, and there are 4 million M4 AR-15s, the semi-automatic civilian equivalent, in circulation, and 99.9% of them are never used in crimes. Okay, so just because someone has an AR-15 at home doesn't mean that they're a bad person. And just because a politician is standing up defending the rights of those people to have AR-15s at homes doesn't mean that that politician wants children to die. So that's not me. I just want to protect the Second Amendment, and that's how I understand it.
I think that sparked another question.
Oh, was that it?
That was supposed to be it, but if you had something really quick, I guess.
Why don't we just send our children, like they do in Israel, send them all to the military so we all do the same thing?
Well, so that is so there's kind of two questions there. One, should training be a requirement to owning an AR-15? I think that's completely reasonable, right? Sure. I think maybe you should say, there's no federal reason, or there's no part of the Second Amendment that says you should be able to own a gun untrained, right? So I think you bring up a good critique, right? I want that class to be free. I don't want cost to be an issue for any constitutional thing, right? We don't charge people to vote. We don't charge people to register to vote. I think that's very important. So I'll set that out. But two, should we have a draft? And the answer to that is no, right? Israel does. Israel is surrounded by enemies that can invade at any time. It's very unlikely that the Canadians will invade us or the Mexicans, right? So I think when we talk about the draft, and I'm just kind of jumping here, is that we need to understand that yes, we have a problem and that fewer people are willing to serve in our military, but this isn't a gun rights problem. This is just a cultural problem. So, and I wouldn't be in favor of reinstating the draft. I have no doubt of that.
Maybe I read wrong.
No, I think you're probably right. I'm in form of some form of gun control.
So you've got these assault rifles. They were never mentioned in the Constitution. Nobody ever heard them in the Constitution. So you're coming up and saying, I'm going to make my own Constitution.
Okay. So, sir, I'll answer that question very simply. The Constitution does not mention Twitter. It does not mention television. It mentions free speech. All right, and the Second Amendment doesn't mention muskets. It mentions arms. All right, and the small arms equivalent of a Brown Bess rifle in 1776 is an M4 rifle today. Right? And so we don't say that the First Amendment only applies to a pamphlet, sir. No, I am not. The Second Amendment and the First Amendment don't talk about the methods. They're very short, right? Like, the right to free speech, the right to keep and bear arms. Like, these aren't talking about this type of weapon or this type of speech. It is free speech, and it is bearing arms, sir. And so this is kind of like what I talked about political leadership, right? Being able to push back respectfully on your view. But we disagree here, and this is the constitutional reason why I disagree, and that is why I think what I think.
I don't think they ever heard about Rodney back in the 1700s.
I can guarantee that no one considered an M4 in 1776. You are absolutely right, sir. But we have a process to modify the amendment, to modify the Constitution. We've gotten rid of amendments before. Well, one amendment, right? We decided that actually alcohol was okay. And if people want to change the Second Amendment in the future, then they can run on that. But I have very big problems with saying that we are going to fix the Second Amendment through activist court decisions, because that is how we have outlawed abortion. And I am pro-choice, and I am pro-gun, because I believe that both are constitutionally protected. I've prompted I've kicked the hornet's nest. So yes, fire away. No, this is quite all right. This is why you bring politicians here, to yell at them. Please do.
It's like having a car. You need to be trained and licensed in order to operate it. You have to buy your insurance and you have to get it registered. So that was my...
Oh, right. So there's kind of two questions here. Training. I'm sorry I left that out earlier. Yeah, I think training is oftentimes appropriate for weapons. At least a simple handgun class for owning handguns, right? Like how to make sure it's secured, that you always store it unloaded, that you keep the ammunition apart. Most of that's just to prevent kids from shooting themselves, which is, the big driver of child mortality. So that's one, training, important. Yes, absolutely. I don't think that the Second Amendment guarantees the right to bear arms and not be trained in them. I think you're right. I think we got 95% of America on board with you. The second is insurance, though. And I'm very nervous about insurance because insurance costs money, okay? And you are risking making gun ownership something that only the rich can afford. And I don't want that, okay? I'm very nervous about that, okay? Not just the rich have a car, but if you look at how much gun insurance costs in San Jose, right, which is a city in California that has instituted this mandatory insurance, it's $10,000 a year. That's a lot, okay? And we have a lot of gun owners in District 1, and not in the world, I'm sorry, not the world, in America, in the United States, who are on fixed income, who don't have that kind of income, who can't pay $10,000 in gun insurance. They can barely pay $5,000 extra in fire insurance to keep their houses. And we shouldn't be making them give up their guns because we institute some, a cost, a tax on gun ownerships. We don't make people pay for voting, even though oftentimes people vote for crazy stuff, right? But that's okay. It's a constitutional right, and we're going to have to accept that risk, all right? But on training, I completely agree with you. Training is absolutely appropriate.
All my family hunted. None of them needed an automatic weapon to kill a deer or an antelope or an elk.
So we don't have automatic weapons for sale to civilians. So that's not it. Semi-automatic, one trigger squeeze, one round down range. That's where we're at, and that's all I'm pushing for. I am not in favor of making automatic weapons legal. So I'll put that one right there. Yes, okay. The second point, is the Second Amendment about hunting? And the answer to that is no, right? We don't look at the Second Amendment through the nexus of, is this a hunting amendment? It is not. It is a readiness-generating amendment. It was designed so that the United States would have a well-trained militia that it could call up at a time of war, because back then, we didn't even have a full-time army, and our National Guard was pretty ad hoc. You know, I'm a reservist. I make fun of the Guard a lot, but and they deserve it. But there's no guardsmen out here. But sorry, that's just picking on someone who's not here. Kind of like Doug, you know. But you know, like, it's important to understand that the Second Amendment was designed to generate people that could fight wars on short notice. And I will tell you, as someone who joined the Army after being raised in a very liberal household, which I liked, but did not get exposure to guns, you know, I didn't shoot that well when I started. And I'm a quick study, and I follow instructions when people are yelling at me and making me do a lot of push-ups when I mess up. But, you know, like, there's something we said for the Second Amendment saying, like, hey, if you're already exposed to guns, you know, the big hero of World War I was this guy named Alvin York. And he, you know, like, was a crack shot out of Kentucky. And he'd grown up, like, shooting ground squirrel for dinner, you know, and he went to World War I, he went to France, got 2 weeks of rifle training, and he captured like 100 Germans, right? Like, this seems like a crazy story, but it's absolutely true, right? So we have war heroes that came out of a hunting culture, that came out of a gun-owning culture, and that is what the Second Amendment was meant to protect, right? So it's a readiness-generating amendment. It's not so that you can go hunt deer and put it on your table, right? The Second Amendment does not read, you know, the right of the people to hunt their own food shall not be infringed, right? Like, it's to keep and bear arms, because it's important for the protection of a free state. Oh, geez, I really should memorize that amendment. It's not very long. But, you know, like, that's what I want to get across to you, is that it's a military amendment, all right? It's about the military, about the paramilitary. It's not about hunting. And so whenever I hear someone on the left say, you don't need that kind of gun to hunt, you know, the hair on the back of my neck raises up, because you're right. And it also has nothing to do with your argument, or at least nothing to do with how I see the argument, which is that this is a constitutionally protected right. And you may disagree with it, but if you disagree with the constitutional right, you should change the Constitution and not just try to get activist judges to throw it out.
All right, I think we're probably over our time. So.
Oh, sorry.
No, that was great. Hey, no, that's what it's all about.
I will stay
right?
around. I'll just stay on stage. We'll let Robert go home. I assume he has people that love him. So yeah.
All right. We want to thank the candidates. I want to thank Robert Suma for being our moderator tonight. I want to thank Ted Langdell over here, who's been doing the live streaming for us. So thank you all for coming tonight. We are glad to see you. We wish there was more of us.
It's on Yuba-Sutter Live on Facebook, right? That's right. And several other places. But it's super easy to find on Facebook. It's on YouTube, right? Yeah, I believe it's on YouTube as well.